Despite commitments from many directions to end human trafficking, the scourge persists. Trafficking is a symptom of the world's inability to protect the poorest and most vulnerable.
Nearly 50 million people enslaved or in coerced labor. It's been a plague that has affected humanity from time immemorial, and it continues.
We live in a polycrisis.
The crises we're dealing with are embedded in the structures of society.
Resource-based conflict is sort of one of the main factors.
The playbook is working, but it's siloed. We're competing against the clock.
Together, we can do things that none of us can do alone. It's in our hands.
And I think very much so that these are issues that need to be...
Human trafficking and slavery has existed from, we read of slavery in the Bible, of the Jews in Egypt, of the Israelites in Egypt. It's been a plague that has affected humanity from time immemorial, and it continues. It continues because there's so much money to be made, not just in the purchase of people, but in how those people are used. Nearly 50 million people enslaved or in coerced labor all across the globe today. So it is a crisis of the first order, and one that there has to be a partnership between the moral forces of this society, led by the religious communities and the governments of this country, to really crack down on it far more effectively than we've done. Almost all of the major faith traditions have a mandate to use our God-given wisdom and abilities to make the world better. Our traditions mandate us to provide direct care and to help create a society that ensures justice and freedom and opportunity for all of its people.
Over 80% of the world identifies with a religious group. And these aren't just identities, these are identities that inform those very economies, right? If you are a Muslim farmer, then there are specific ways you interact with your economy through your faith lens. So the IF20 is bringing that, not just for economy, but also for human rights, right? We live in a polycrisis, we live in a globalized world, and unless we're bringing the faith lens to all of the urgent issues that are being faced by G20 countries, but also broadly the world, the developing world, then we're gonna have a blind spot. We need that faith perspective in order to connect with 80% of the world, address the problems that 80% of the world is facing, and beyond that, obviously, because freedom of religion or belief is going to protect the secular world as much as it's going to protect the religious world.
Solutions to global problems need to be inclusive of those kinds of communities. Indeed, it's almost a moral litmus test for the ethical soundness of the solutions that we devise, that those communities be included and part of the solution. Not simply part of the solution in the sense that they're able to enjoy the benefits of the solution. Obviously that part is crucial, but part of the solution in the sense that their often unique experiences, wisdom, their voices are heard in the way that we define the problem and the way that we devise the solutions to it.
Human trafficking is a symptom, perhaps one of the most visible, of the failure of our current social model.
One of the greatest challenges that we're facing, and one of the most important dialogues that's taking place in the G20 right now, are the actual causes of poverty. So when we talk about the reality that the majority of the world's countries are struggling, are developing countries, there are reasons for that. And when we talk about things like human trafficking and how poor people are moved to be sexually exploited or to be taken advantage of for their work, when we talk about those particular things, financial secrecy, things like anonymous shell companies enable this kind of taking hostage of people and moving them.
It is often coerced and enforced labor that affects so many different industries around the world. on a local level in terms of sweatshops that people are forced into out of those local communities, but people traffic for sex trafficking purposes, for labor purposes, to serve as maids in homes in rich countries with a promise of that they would be rewarded for that, and then they end up with enormous debts that they owe people, and they're trapped in this. So it is a plague around the world, and if we include in that forced marriages, we're talking about almost doubling the number of people in coerced activities that they might not otherwise be. They would not have voluntarily gone.
Resource-based conflict is sort of one of the main factors pushing conflict at the global level, and that I believe something like 80% of these conflicts are taking place on indigenous lands, and so these issues are all interlinked.
We often talk about the 3 Ps, to prevent trafficking, to protect the victims of trafficking, to prosecute the traffickers, as the core of what's happening. Our first 2, if we're going to be effective, the religious community can play a very, very important role. We can help educate our people what are the signs to look for of people trafficking. We can educate them in many of the countries of the automatic numbers to call, the 800 numbers, the free phone numbers that they can call to report what looks like a trafficking situation, and where the police are trained to respond to those calls immediately to try to check out what the situation is. Secondly, we can set up programs that when victims find their way out, are either escaped or rescued, that there are communities there to welcome them and to provide for them, to help them with housing, to help them with a support network, to help them find health needs provided for, etc.
The playbook is working, but it's siloed. It's a siloed playbook. Unfortunately, everyone has an urgent issue that they're trying to tackle. Even within the human rights space, everyone has their equivalent IF20 meetings where they say, this is the most important human right. This is the most urgent cause. No doubt there's data to support that. We are inundated with data though. And so we're gonna have to think differently about how to bring playbooks together. If we each tackle our own individual issues in silos, without interdisciplinary partnerships, without interfaith partnerships, then we will plateau. We're competing, essentially, maybe for scarce funding or time or resources, but honestly, we're competing against the clock. Authoritarians are doing well to consolidate their efforts and unify their goals, and democratic-minded nations need to do the same. We need to unify our efforts and consolidate our goals so that instead of taking a large breadth approach where we take on every crisis at the same time, we can really narrow in on specific targets, deliver on those targets, and then expand our resources and our goals.
We must understand that the crises we're dealing with are embedded in the structures of society. The crises are becoming existential, and it needs bold measures and bold leadership.
Only those who are involved with the state, equipped with the state, and that knowledge will be able to put an end to this type of crime.
This kind of conference brings together the people who really are knowledgeable champions of different segments of protecting the vulnerable, ensuring that no one will be left behind.
This is a G20 format, which recognizes that the world is changing, that recognizes that the configuration of countries that are in a position to shape policy solutions is changing. And that if you want to have a conversation that is about the changing rules of how we govern the world, a set of rules that must by design no longer reflect a limited set of cultural, social, and inevitably religious experiences, that you're going to need to widen the table in terms of the voices that are involved.
The religious communities of the world could help transform this effort to protect God's creation. It's in our hands. Together, we can do things that none of us can do alone.